Picture a room the size of a warehouse. Now fill it floor to ceiling with every piece of clothing worn by every sick, dead and desperate person in London for the past 20 years. Add the smell of sweat so old it has become something else entirely. A mineral reek, like iron and rot and a third thing you cannot name. Add the weight of a coat that belonged to a man who died of cholera last Thursday and was stripped off him before the body was cold. Add the hands of 100 dealers who have long since learned never to ask where their stock comes from. Because the answer is almost always worse than the silence. That's Petticoat Lane in the winter of 1848. The beating, reeking, magnificent heart of London's second-hand clothing trade. A place where you could catch typhus from a waistcoat in the morning and sell it for £1 by afternoon. A place where a lady's silk evening gown makes its slow, inexorable journey down through every layer of society until it ends up patching the breeches of a ditch digger who doesn't know what silk is and wouldn't care if he did. A place where the dead dress the living, and where nobody says that out loud, because saying things out loud has a way of making them real. 250,000 people pass through the lane on a Sunday. 250,000. In a space you could walk end to end in 4 minutes. Every nationality in London's swirling, impossible population. Every smell. Every language. Every kind of human desperation and cunning and hope, packed shoulder to shoulder, with nowhere to go and nothing to do but buy. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists looking at the market stalls and thinking how quaint, how historical, what a charming glimpse of a vanished world. We're living it. 1 week, 1 person, everything they would have seen and smelled and touched and survived. I make these history sleep stories, and genuinely I have no idea if you're actually sleeping to them, or if you're all just people who enjoy lying in the dark thinking about Victorian disease transmission through second-hand textiles. Either way, subscribe if you want, get comfortable, and whatever you're wearing right now, whatever's touching your skin at this very moment, you might want to think about where it came from. Just a thought. Here we go. The coat comes to you on a Monday morning in February, and even before you touch it, you know something is wrong. You can tell by the smell. You have been working in Mrs. Brennan's sorting room for 4 months now, and you've learned that every piece of clothing has a story, and the first chapter is always the smell. Wool gone wet and never properly dried has one particular odour, a muddy, heavy animal darkness, like something in the slow process of becoming earth. Sweat has a different smell depending on the body that produced it. Working men smell of iron and salt and effort. Clerks smell of candle wax and a particular anxious staleness. The clothes of the very poor smell of something else entirely, something you have no word for, a smell that comes from eating badly for so long that the body starts consuming itself, producing something sour and thin and final. But this coat doesn't smell like any of those things. This coat smells like the river, not the Thames as you have come to understand it, which is its almost category of horror. A smell so vast and complex and terrible that you have essentially stopped registering it the way you stop registering your own heartbeat. This is different. This is the particular sweetish rot that the Thames leaves on things it has held for a while. The cold silt smell, the dark water smell, the smell of something that was below the surface long enough for the surface to make its mark. "Well," says Mrs. Brennan from behind you, "you're standing at the long wooden sorting table in the back room of her shop at number 43 Wentworth Street, Whitechapel, and you're holding this coat at arm's length without meaning to, the way you might hold an animal you aren't sure is dead. It arrived an hour ago, brought in by a man you didn't recognize. Not one of the regular collectors, not one of Mrs. Brennan's usual suppliers, the rag and bone men who come on Tuesday afternoons, the dolly mop who sends her cast-offs through on Fridays, the pair of brothers who work the better neighbourhoods on the north side and sometimes turn up with things that are, almost certainly, not entirely legitimately obtained. This man was a stranger. Thin. The kind of thinness that isn't natural but earned, worn into the body over years of not quite enough food and too much cold. He had eyes that stayed very still when he talked, which is the opposite of what eyes usually do, and he kept his hands moving toward the door even while he was still technically present in the transaction. He'd accepted what Mrs. Brennan offered him. You didn't hear the figure, and he was gone before you'd finished writing the entry in the stock ledger. The coat is dark blue, or it was once. Now it has settled into a colour that doesn't have a name, somewhere between blue and grey and a deep absorbed black, the colour of something that has taken in too much of the world and has stopped fighting it. Wool. Good wool. You can feel that even through your reluctance to hold it. A gentleman's coat. Not the finest, not the cut of someone with real money, but not cheap either. Someone who had reached for respectability and caught enough of it to matter to him. The lining is silk, cream-coloured silk, or it would be if it weren't this colour of old water. The buttons are real horn. 2 of them are missing, replaced some time ago with plain black ones that don't match. The kind of repair you make when you can't afford a tailor and won't go without. There are stains on the collar and the left lapel. Dark. You don't pursue the question of what kind. It came from the water, you say. It comes out as something between a statement and a question, which is exactly how you feel about it. Mrs. Brennan doesn't confirm or deny this. She takes the coat from you with her thick red hands, hands that have handled more cloth in their lifetime than most people will ever see, holds it up to the narrow window, turns it slowly, methodically, the way she examines every piece of stock that comes through her door. Her face gives nothing away. After 30 years in this trade, her face has learned to give nothing away. Check the pockets, she says. Mrs. Brennan, check the pockets. You check the pockets. The right one is empty. The left one has a small folded piece of paper, damp at the edges, the ink run into cloudy grey smears. Whatever it said, it doesn't say anything now. A letter, maybe, or a receipt, or something else entirely. And beneath the paper, something small and hard. You feel it before you see it. You bring it out into the pale winter light from the window. A button, a single gilt button, not belonging to this coat, not matching anything on it. Someone carried it in their pocket separately. The button has a pattern pressed into the gilt surface. A sailing ship, you think. The kind of button that comes from a naval uniform, from a man who was or had been at sea. Mrs. Brennan is watching you. Her expression is the same as always. Flat, unreadable, the surface of deep water. But there is something behind her eyes that you have learned in 4 months to identify. A calculation. She is deciding something, and she is deciding it quietly, without letting you know what the question is. Put it in the pile for Rag Lane, she says. Bottom of the pile, and that is all. You put the coat in the pile for Rag Lane. You tuck the gilt button into the pocket of your apron without quite deciding to do so. The decision happening below the level of thought. You don't mention it. Mrs. Brennan returns to the shop floor, and Aggie comes in from the yard, and the morning continues, and the coat disappears into the pile like a stone into water. You get on with your work. That's what you do here. You always get on with it. This is London in the February of 1848, and you are 17 years old, and you've been in this city for just under 5 months, and you are learning, faster than you ever wanted to learn, that there are certain things you do not ask about. Your name is Sarah Marsh. You came from Hodnet in Shropshire, which is the kind of place where everyone has known everyone else for 3 generations and nothing stays secret longer than a fortnight, and where the biggest industry is agriculture and the second biggest is discussing other people's business. You left in September because your father died, and when he died it became apparent that what looked like modest but sufficient circumstances from the outside was in fact a collection of debts barely held together by his continued presence, and when that presence stopped, the whole structure came apart with remarkable speed. You arrived in London on the back of a carrier's wagon, wedged between someone's boxes and someone else's crated chickens, who spent the entire journey expressing their opinion of the situation at considerable volume, watching the city build itself out of the flat horizon, like something that had always been there and was only now deciding to make itself known. It grew from a smudge to a haze to a darkness on the sky, to a collection of shapes, to a thing of such overwhelming scale and complexity that by the time the wagon turned into the streets proper, you had stopped trying to understand it and had simply started trying to survive the sensory impact. The noise was the first thing, a roar that wasn't one sound but 10,000 sounds happening simultaneously, so loud and so constant that your ears couldn't separate any individual element, just this wall of human life pressing against you from every direction. Wheels on stone and horses and vendors and children and dogs and somewhere, always, bells. The smell was the second thing. You'd been warned about the smell of London. Everyone is warned about the smell of London. The warnings are insufficient. You arrived at Mrs. Brennan's door on Wentworth Street with a letter of introduction from the vicar of Hodnet, who had known her years ago in a different part of her life that she doesn't talk about, and who believed she might take on a girl who needed respectable work and had few other options. She looked at you for about 15 seconds when you came to her door, took in your dress, plain grey wool, decent but not fashionable, the dress of someone making an effort. Your boots, good leather but beginning to crack at the toe on the right foot. Your bundle tied with rope. The letter, which she took without reading. "Can you sew?" she asked. "Yes." "Can you tell wool from cotton by feel? Close your eyes." She pressed a small fold of fabric into your hands. You felt it. Soft, slight give, a warmth that cotton doesn't have. "Wool," you said. She gave you another piece, smoother, cooler, less give. "Cotton," you said, and then, because there was something about the particular coolness of it, or possibly linen. She looked at you for another 3 seconds. "It's linen," she said. "You've got good hands. That matters here." She stepped aside and let you in, and that was 5 months ago, and this is now. And the coat from the river is at the bottom of the pile for Rag Lane, and you have the gilt button in your apron pocket, and the morning's work is only just beginning. The sorting room is in the back of Mrs. Brennan's premises, behind the floor-to-ceiling shelves of folded and hanging clothes that constitute the retail part of the business. It is roughly 20 feet by 15 feet, with the stone floor worn smooth in paths that correspond to the routes people walk most often. From the door to the table, from the table to the shelves along the east wall, from the shelves to the small fireplace in the corner that produces heat, with a reluctance that suggests it is doing it under protest. In winter, The stone floor is cold enough to feel through the soles of your boots by mid-morning. 2 high windows face north, giving a light that is useful for examining cloth because it doesn't flatter anything, shows every flaw and stain with honest indifference. In February, this light arrives late and leaves early and spends the intervening hours at a low, grudging angle that makes you lean close to whatever you're examining and strain your eyes by noon. You spend most of your working day in this room. The work is simple enough to describe and hard enough to do. Clothes come in, from collectors and from households, and from dealers further along the supply chain, and you sort them. Examine each piece. Identify the fabric, the condition, the origin if you can determine it, and the approximate value. Add it to the ledger in the wooden box on the corner of the table. Place it in the appropriate pile. This is what sorting sounds like. The soft collapse of cloth onto cloth, the rasp of wool against wool, the small percussion of buttons against the table's edge when something falls, the near-constant whisper of fabric moving through hands, the scratch of the pen in the ledger. And underneath all of it, barely audible but always present, the sounds of Wentworth Street outside. Carts, voices, the distant shout of a vendor, the bark of a dog that lives somewhere nearby and has opinions it expresses frequently. You have learned the weight of different fabrics. Wool has a density that cotton never achieves, a body and substance that you feel in your palms. Silk has a particular resistance between your fingers, a coolness that persists longer than makes sense, a slip that you have to actively control, or it will simply fall from your hands. Linen starts rough and softens with washing, and the degree of softness is a kind of history. Run your fingers over a piece of linen and you can feel, approximately, how long it's been worn and how many times it's been washed, which tells you something about the life it has lived. You've learned to read stains the way a reader reads text. Candle wax leaves a pale, slightly sunken circle with a dull finish where the weave has been coated. Ink is blue-black in fresh clothes, brown-black in old ones, and always slightly stiffens the fibres around it. Cooking grease gives a yellowish cast and a characteristic softness, the fibres loosened and darkened. Blood is rust brown when dried, and turns the weave crisp in a way that nothing else quite duplicates. And there are other stains, the ones that come on clothes from certain places, from certain circumstances, that you have learned to recognise on sight without putting names to them, because names have weight and you would rather not carry them. You have learned to identify vermin. Fleas leave trails of small dark specks in the seams and folds, particularly at the collar and waistband where warmth collects. Lice favour the same spots. Bedbugs leave rust-coloured smears on pale fabric, and a distinctive sweetish smell underneath the general smell of the clothes. And any piece showing this goes immediately into a particular pile that you do not add to the main stock ledger, but instead mark in a separate small book with a red cover that Mrs. Brennan keeps locked in the drawer of her desk. Those clothes go out to the backyard where something happens to them that you have not directly witnessed. On the days when that process is happening, the smell that comes in through the back door is chemical and sharp, a smell that makes your eyes sting and your throat tighten, and Aggie says without looking up from her work, sulphur fumigation, and goes back to whatever she's doing, and that is all that is said. The cold in this room in February settles into your bones by mid-morning and stays there regardless of what you do. Not the clean, sharp cold of a frost, which at least has clarity and definition. This is a saturated cold, a cold that lives in the old fabric and breathes out of it when you handle it. It seeps through your fingertips and creeps up your wrists and sets up residence in the small bones of your hands. By 10 o'clock they ache. By noon they are clumsy, dropping small things, slow to respond to instructions. You have to watch them work instead of simply trusting them to work, which is exhausting in a way that's hard to explain. Mrs. Brennan showed you on the third day. Both hands pressed together, rubbing hard and fast, then shaking them out sharp, then pressing again. Repeat until the blood comes back. She showed you without comment and went back to her own work, and you have done it every morning since. Aggie does the same. You both do it without discussing it, without acknowledging that you're doing it. Just this small private ceremony of cold hands being argued back into usefulness, performed side by side at the start of each day. Aggie is the other permanent presence in the sorting room. She's about 14 years old, small even for that age, with a watchful quality about her that suggests a childhood spent developing peripheral vision. She has been working for Mrs. Brennan since she was 9. Whatever the circumstances of those first years were, she has never described them, and you have not asked. There is a burn mark on her chin, old and slightly puckered. The skin there a different texture than the surrounding skin. She wears her hair in a braid pulled so tight it looks painful. She talks almost constantly but almost never about herself. She talks about the trade, about Wentworth Street, about the neighbourhood, about the people who pass through. She's a comprehensive and detailed commentator on the world immediately around her, and an absolute blank on the world that includes her own history. That coat this morning, Aggie says, not looking up from the grey wool skirt she's mending, was it a drowned man's? I don't know, you say. Smelled like the river. Yes. Aggie takes 3 careful stitches, pulls the thread through. We get them sometimes. Men who go in the river, jumpers mostly, some accidents, some... She pauses for a single stitch. Something else. What happens to the clothes? What do you think happens to the clothes? Her needle goes in. Her needle comes out. They get cleaned. They get dried. They get sold. You don't say anything to this. You're thinking about the man in the blue coat, the man who had been in the Thames recently enough for it to still speak out of the fabric, the man who had replaced 2 of his buttons with cheaper ones because that was the repair of someone who couldn't afford better, the man whose coat had a silk lining that said he had once been, or aspired to be, something above where he ended up. You're thinking about the thin man with the still eyes. You're thinking about the gilt button in your apron pocket. Does it bother you, you ask? Sorting dead men's clothes? Aggie bites off her thread, reaches for the next piece. Everything in here came from someone who's not wearing it anymore, she says. The only question is why they stopped. She says this without drama, without sentiment. The way you'd say a thing that has long since stopped being interesting because it's simply true. She is 14 years old and she's been doing this work since she was 9, and this is what 5 years in the rag trade produces in a person. You tuck this information away. You pick up the next piece from the incoming pile. A child's dress, grey-printed cotton, worn nearly through at the elbows, a tear along the left side seam that someone has attempted to repair and given up on. You feel the fabric between your fingers. Cotton. Cheap. The kind of cloth that goes thin and grey with this washing until there's barely any substance left to it. You add it to the ledger. You place it in the appropriate pile. You get on with the morning. Mrs. Kathleen Brennan is 52 years old, Irish-born, and has been in London for 26 years. She came over during the bad times, not the very worst of the bad times that would come a few years later and be a different order of catastrophe, but bad enough, in a year when the small farm her father kept had produced next to nothing for the second year running, and there was more future in crossing the water than staying. She came with her husband, Patrick, who died of fever in the winter of his second London year. She was 25, alone in a city where she knew nobody, speaking English with an accent thick enough to get her refused work at half the places she applied, and she had, as she once described it to you in one of the rare moments when she talks about herself, precisely 1 shilling and 4pence to her name. She found work in the rag trade because the rag trade doesn't require letters of reference or English that sounds a particular way. The rag trade requires hands and a willingness to handle things that other people won't. She started as a collector, going house to house in the better neighbourhoods, knocking on back doors, asking for cast-offs, buying for pennies what she could sell for more, learning which streets had the best pickings and which days the households put their old clothes out, building up the knowledge of the trade the way you build up anything, slowly, by doing it, by making mistakes and noting what they cost you. By her early 30s she had a barrow. By her late 30s, a stall at Petticoat Lane on Sundays. By 43, the premises on Wentworth Street. She is not a warm person in any way that announces itself. She doesn't use your name unless she needs to specify which of you she's addressing. She doesn't ask about your life in Shropshire or your family or how you're finding London or whether you're managing. She doesn't make small talk. She communicates in brief, precise statements that contain exactly the information required and nothing else. But she has never in 5 months been unfair to you. She has never docked your wages without reason. She has never asked you to do something without explaining why, at least minimally. On the 3 occasions when you've been ill, she has sent Aggie up to your room with soup and told you not to come down until your colour was better. On the occasion when the man from 2 doors down made a remark to you in the alley, that was not a remark you should have had made to you, she dealt with it. You don't know exactly how. You weren't there. You only know it was dealt with because he crosses the street now when he sees her coming. She teaches you things. Not in a way that feels like teaching, not with any stated intention or structure, but in the way a thing is passed on when one person does it properly in front of another person long enough. You watch her examine a piece of cloth, and you understand something about examination. You watch her deal with a supplier, and you understand something about the space between what things are said to be worth and what they are actually worth, and the negotiation between those two positions. You watch her interact with customers, and you understand that the transaction happening on the surface, money for goods, is resting on a much more complicated transaction underneath it, a transaction about trust and reputation, and whether this woman is someone you want to do business with again. She has been doing this for nearly 30 years. She is very, very good at it. You want to become her. This is something you have not said out loud, and would not say out loud, because it sounds either ambitious in a way you can't quite justify, or sentimental in a way she wouldn't welcome. But the thought is there. It sits behind the daily work, like a reason for doing it carefully. Let me describe the supply chain, because you need to understand it to understand where you are in it. At the top, if you can call it the top, are the households. The families of the middle and upper classes who generate, in the course of simply living, a constant flow of clothing that has been worn enough to be unfashionable, or outgrown, or simply tired of, but not so worn that it's lost all value. These households deal with the cast-offs in various ways. Sometimes they pass them down to servants, who wear them, who then pass them on when they've worn them down another notch. Sometimes they give them to charities. Sometimes they sell them directly to collectors who come to the back door. The collectors are the next layer. Men and women, more women in this trade. Women seem to have a feel for it, who work the streets and the back doors, buying whatever they can and selling it on to the dealers. They are intermediaries, and their value is mobility and knowledge. They know which streets and which days and which households. They know what to pay and what they can get for it, or they learn quickly. The margin is small and the work is physical, and the knowledge is the whole of the capital. Then come the dealers, people like Mrs. Brennan, who buy from the collectors, sort and clean and repair the stock, and sell it on either through a fixed premises like the shop on Wentworth Street, or through a stall at one of the markets. Petticoat Lane on Sunday is the biggest. There are others, the New Cut in Lambeth, the Caledonian Market in Islington, the smaller street markets that operate daily. Below the dealers, if below is the right direction, and in this trade direction is complicated, are the people who buy from the dealers, which is to say, everyone. Every level of London society below the very wealthy shops for second-hand clothes to some degree. Because new clothes are expensive and London is not a city where most people have money to spare. Clerks buy waistcoats, seamstresses buy fabric remnants, crossing sweepers buy boots, and below them, and this time below genuinely is the right word, are the people who buy from the people who buy from the dealers. The clothes continue moving down. Each transaction wears them further, repairs them less, prices them lower, until the garment is finally so far gone that it has left the category of clothing entirely and become something else. Rags for paper making, stuffing for furniture, fertilizer, nothing is wasted. In the second-hand clothes trade of 1848, nothing is ever wasted. A coat enters the system at whatever level its quality allows and travels steadily downward until there is nothing left of it that can be sold for any purpose. And then the remnant of the remnant is sold for that. This is the world you are living in. The morning continues. Piece by piece the incoming pile diminishes. The sorted piles grow. Around 11, a collector comes in through the back door, a woman called Mary Walsh who does the houses north of Commercial Road, and usually turns up once a week with a bundle the size of a large man. Today she has 2 bundles, both tied in canvas, both smelling of the particular mixture of house smell and cold air that fresh stock always carries. Fresh in the sense of not yet having been through the sorting room, not fresh in any other sense. Good morning, Mrs. Walshy, you say, because Mrs. Brennan is at the front of the shop with a customer and Aggie is running an errand. You're temporarily in charge of intake. Mrs. Walsh sets her bundles down on the floor with the slight grunt of someone depositing a significant weight. She's a broad, grey-haired woman with arms that suggest she's been carrying things for a long time. She wears a green cotton dress under a brown wool shawl, both of which you can identify now without thinking, the way you have learned to identify things that you see every day. The big one's from the Fenchurch Street house, she says. 3 daughters grown and moving to Bath. Lot of good wool in there, lot of lace trim on the evening things. She tilts her head toward the second bundle. The small one's bits and pieces. Usual sources. Usual sources means she doesn't want to specify. You write collection, mixed, usual sources in the ledger, and you don't ask. Price, you say. She names a figure. You hold the number in your head for a moment, working out what you think is in the bundles against what she's asking. The Fenchurch Street house sounds good. The usual sources bundle is harder to value without seeing it. I'll need to show Mrs. Brennan the Fenchurch Street bundle before we confirm, you say. Mrs. Walsh nods as if she expected this. She about? In a moment, she lowers herself onto the stool near the door, the stool kept there for exactly this purpose, for collectors who are waiting to be paid and who will be waiting for a few minutes because Mrs. Brennan does one thing at a time and does not rush. And she pulls her shawl tighter and she waits. You turn back to the sorting table. The gilt button is still in your apron pocket. You've touched it twice since this morning. Not deliberately, just your fingers finding it when they moved past. It has a slight roughness along one edge where the gilt has worn down. A small smooth spot at the centre of the ship's hull where a thumb must have rubbed it repeatedly, and it is cold right now, with the cold of the sorting room. You work through the incoming pile. You do not think about the river. By midday, the sorting room has a quality of organised chaos that is comfortable if you understand the system and incomprehensible if you don't. 14 piles occupy every surface. The long sorting table, the two smaller tables against the south wall, the floor space between the shelves. Each pile represents a category and a destination. The best wool goes to one pile, directly to the shop floor. The good cotton goes to another. The items that need repair before they can be sold go to the mending pile, which is Aggie's particular territory. Items of uncertain origin go to a pile that Mrs. Brennan reviews personally before any decision is made about them. Items too far gone for retail go to the rag lane pile, which is sold by weight to the rag merchants who broker the transition between used clothing and raw material. And at the bottom of the rag lane pile, somewhere in the middle of the stack, a dark blue coat is waiting. Midday means dinner, which is bread and a piece of hard cheese and a cup of something hot from the kitchen behind the shop. A room roughly the size of a generous cupboard with a small range, and two shelves, and a window that looks onto the yard. You eat standing because there is nowhere to sit in the kitchen when Mrs. Brennan and Aggie and you are all in it simultaneously, and sitting would require rearranging the small stool and the crate that serve as supplementary seating, which isn't worth the effort for 20 minutes. The bread is yesterday's, which at this time of year means it's still edible. In summer, bread goes quickly. You've learned to finish it the day it arrives. Mrs. Walsh get paid? Mrs. Brennan asks. Fenchurch Street bundle, yes. Mixed bundle, not yet. Mrs. Brennan tears a piece of bread with her teeth. Send it back, the mixed bundle. Tell her I'll look at it tomorrow. Aggie raises her eyebrows slightly, which means she thinks there's something in the mixed bundle Mrs. Brennan wants to have a proper look at before it disappears into stock. Or wants it to go away entirely. You don't ask. Yes, Mrs. Brennan. After dinner, the afternoon is sorting and mending, and when Mrs. Brennan sends you, errand running. Today she sends you to a dyer's workshop on Brick Lane, with a bundle of cotton pieces, whites and creams that are too stained for sale in their current colour, but can be overdyed dark enough to conceal everything. You carry the bundle through streets that are, in February, a thoroughfare of grey and brown, and the occasional hard red of a fire in a brazier. Wentworth Street connects to Commercial Street connects to Brick Lane, a journey of perhaps 10 minutes on a quiet day, and 20 on a busy one. Today is somewhere between. The pavements are wet from morning rain, and the mud from the unpaved sections of road has been worked to a particular consistency by a morning's worth of traffic, thick enough to stick, thin enough to splash, and you keep to the drier edges where the foot traffic has worn a path against the buildings. Brick Lane in 1848 is many things at once. It is silk weavers' territory, though the silk industry is in a long decline and has been for years. the weavers' workshops growing quieter one by one as cheaper cloth from the northern mills drives the price of handmade silk down below the point where a man can live on it. It is also the heart of the Irish community in this part of London. You can hear it in the voices around you, a rhythm and a particular cadence that is different from the London voices you've been learning. And it is dyer's territory, which is apparent a full street before you arrive, the air carrying the sharp chemical smell of the dyeing process, mordants and fixing agents, and the hot fabric smell of cloth being transformed from one colour to another. The workshop you're going to is run by a man called Mr. Hartigan, who is one of Mrs. Brennan's regular contacts and who has, as she described him to you the first time she sent you alone, a fair eye for colour and an even fairer eye for where questions aren't welcome. You'd asked her what she meant by that once. She'd looked at you with an expression that suggested you would work it out in time and turned back to her work. Mr. Hartigan is a small, compact man whose hands and forearms are permanently stained to the elbow in colours that shift over the course of the week, depending on what he's been working with. Today they're a deep indigo blue, the colour so absorbed into his skin that it looks like it goes all the way down. He has quick, precise movements and a way of examining cloth that reminds you of Mrs. Brennan. The same turning in the light, the same attention to what the fabric is trying to tell you. He takes the bundle from you, unties it on his work table, spreads the pieces out. His hands move through them quickly. Tell Mrs. Brennan. All of it's doable except the 3 with the hard stains on the shoulder. Those'll bleed through whatever I put over them. She can have black and it'll mostly be fine, or she can take them back. I'll tell her. Price same as last time. Payment when she collects. Yes, Mr. Hartigan. He begins retying the bundle, then stops, looks at you. You're the new one. 4 months, you say. He nods, considering this. Learning the trade? As much as Mrs. Brennan will teach. He laughs, a short, dry sound. She'll teach you plenty if you can survive the doing of it. He finishes tying the bundle and sets it to the side. Tell her the blue ones. If she's got anything she wants doing. I've got a good pot going this week, clean colour. Worth it. You note this. You turn to leave. One more thing. He doesn't look up from his work table, where he's already moving to something else. Girl your age, new to the trade. There's things come through that spot you shouldn't dwell on too long. A pause. The sound of fabric shifting. Mrs. Brennan knows this already, but since you're the one running the errands now, he leaves it there. You stand in the doorway for a moment, the cold air of Brick Lane at your back, the hot dye smell of the workshop in your face. Yes, Mr. Hartigan, you say. You go back to Wentworth Street. The thing about the second-hand clothes trade that nobody tells you before you enter it, or if they try to tell you, you can't quite understand it until you've been inside it for a few months, is that it is a trade in bodies, not in the way the Resurrection Men trade in bodies. Not that directly, but the clothes have been against skin. They have been shaped by shoulders and pulled by movement and stretched at the knee and abraded at the cuff. A coat doesn't just wear, it learns the body wearing it. The back moulds slightly to the specific curve of a specific spine. The sleeves take on the particular way a particular set of arms hang. The angle at which one man holds himself different from the angle at which another does. You can feel this when you handle the clothes. The ghost of the body is in the garment. Some pieces are easy to be neutral about. A child's plain cotton dress, worn thin at the elbows, has a sad quality to it, but not a disturbing one. A labourer's heavy wool jacket, reeking of work and cold air, is physical and present, but not haunting. A set of plain cotton shirts, 3 of them in good condition, recently washed, These feel like objects, like inventory. But occasionally something comes through that doesn't let you be neutral about it. A piece in which the former wearer is too present, the curve of the back too specific, the smell beneath whatever else is in there, too much like a person. And those are the pieces that stay with you after the workday, that appear at the edge of your mind when you're trying to sleep. The blue coat from the river is like that. You know this already, even though it's been hours since you put it in the raglan pile. You know it's going to be one of the ones that stays. You don't think about what that means. You have 5 months of practice at not thinking about what things mean when thinking about it won't help you. Sunday is different from every other day, and not only because the shop is closed. Sunday is Petticoat Lane, and Petticoat Lane is something you need to be told about before you experience it, because without the telling, the experiencing is simply too much. Petticoat Lane is not actually a lane, or rather it is, or was, a lane called Houndsditch that at some point in its history became so thoroughly associated with the second-hand clothes trade that the trade renamed it. The name comes from the petticoats and other garments hung outside the shops and along the gutters to attract buyers. The whole street turned into a kind of open-air wardrobe. The official maps still say Middlesex Street. Nobody who knows the place calls it that. On weekdays, it is a busy commercial street in the heart of Jewish Whitechapel, lined with permanent shops and workshops and the particular dense activity of a neighbourhood that never quite stops. On Sundays, it becomes something else. The Sunday market starts before dawn. By the time the winter light is strong enough to show you anything, the stalls have been set up, the piles of clothing arranged, the voices of the dealers already rising into the cold air. It is loud, and it is crowded, and it smells of every fabric and every body that fabric has ever been against. All of those smells overlapping and blending into a single smell that is the smell of Petticoat Lane and nothing else on earth. You go for the first time in early October, 2 weeks after your arrival, when Mrs. Brennan judges you ready to be useful at the stall, rather than just confusing and underfoot. She has a stall at the eastern end, close enough to the centre of the market to have good foot traffic, but far enough from the worst of the crowd to be manageable. Getting there requires getting up at 4 in the morning, loading the hand cart with the week's stock that is destined for the market rather than the shop. The piece is too good for bulk sale, but not quite right for the fixed premises, the quantities of smaller items that sell better in the market context, the stock that simply needs to move, and pushing the cart through dark Whitechapel streets to arrive before the best spots are taken. The first time you helped push the cart with Aggie on the other side and Mrs. Brennan walking ahead carrying the folding table in 2 parts, the cart's left wheel making a sound that you will hear in your sleep for weeks afterward, a rhythmic squeaking protest that the cart has been making for longer than anyone can remember, and will presumably continue making until the wheel finally gives out. You could barely see. The streets were lit here and there by a lamp or a window, but mostly they were the particular dark of early morning in a city that hasn't got going yet, lit faintly from above by the reflection of its own lights off the cloud cover, and Aggie navigating by something that wasn't quite memory and wasn't quite instinct, but something that comes from having done the same route at the same hour for enough years that the body knows it without being asked. The lane, when you arrived, was already half alive. Already there were figures moving in the half-dark, setting up, calling to each other across the space in voices that were both conversational and carrying, the voices of people who spend their working lives projecting across noise. Already there was a smell of coffee from a stall near the entrance, a thin, bright smell cutting through everything else, and the particular bakery smell of bread that someone was selling from a covered basket. By the time the winter sun finally achieved what could be called light, thin, grey, suggesting rather than insisting on visibility, the market was full. Full is not a word that captures it. Full suggests a limit reached, a space that can take no more. What Petticoat Lane becomes on a Sunday is beyond full. It exceeds its own physical dimensions in some way that you cannot explain architecturally but can feel. The press of people so constant and so dense that you stop thinking of them as individuals and start experiencing them as a medium, like moving through something, like being inside the body of something very large and very busy. Everybody shouts. Everybody shouts because everybody else is shouting, and if you don't shout, you don't exist. The vendors' cries layer over each other until they stop being individual messages and become like music. Not pleasant music, not music anyone has composed or would choose, but rhythmic, cyclical, rising and falling in a way that has its own structure. Old clothes, old clothes, old clothes. Coats, hats, trousers. Any coats today? Best wool in the lane. Come see for yourself. Boots, good boots, almost new. Shirts 3 for 6pence. Shirts 3 for 6pence. Shirts. You learn on that first Sunday that the market operates at a velocity that has no equivalent elsewhere. A customer stops, examines something, names a price, you counter, they counter. You come to agreement or they walk away. The whole process takes between 15 seconds and 2 minutes, and in either case they are gone and the next person is already looking at whatever they were looking at, and there is no pause between transactions, no moment to collect yourself. You do the next thing, then the next, then the next. Mrs. Brennan is extraordinary at this. She operates the stall the way a skilled musician operates a difficult instrument, entirely without apparent effort, every movement economical and precise, her pricing never wrong enough to lose a sale and never soft enough to lose profit, her read of customers, what they're actually going to pay, what they actually want, so accurate that it seems like reading minds. You watch her between your own transactions, and you try to understand what she's doing. But most of it happens below the level of the explicable. It's in the way she looks at a customer before she speaks. In the slight adjustment of her stance that happens when someone picks up something expensive and handles it too casually. In the exact tone she uses, which is neither warm nor cold, but something more useful than either. By the end of your first Sunday, your voice is gone from the shouting, and your feet ache from the standing, and your hands are stiff from the cold, and you're more tired than you have been since you arrived in London, which is saying something. You count the day's takings on the walk back. Mrs. Brennan hands you the money box to hold while she manages the cart, and the number is larger than you expected. Not extraordinary, but solid. A good Sunday. You did well, Mrs. Brennan says when you're back at Wentworth Street and the stock is stowed and the takings recorded. You know she means it because she says it once, flatly, and doesn't elaborate, and doesn't look at you when she says it. That is how she means things. You go upstairs to your room, a small room on the second floor between Mrs. Brennan's larger room and the room where Aggie sleeps, and you lie down on your bed without taking off your coat, and you are asleep before any complete thought has formed. This has been going on for 4 months now, Sunday after Sunday, the lane every week, the shop the rest of the time, the sorting room every day, the slow accumulation of knowledge about cloth and condition and price, and the dozen other things the trade requires you to know. But now it is February, and it is Monday morning, and there is a coat from the river in the rag lane pile, and something about this week already feels different from other weeks, in a way you can't name yet. You pick up the next piece from the incoming pile, a man's waistcoat, dark green wool, double-breasted, good buttons, brass, not horn. You run your hands over it. Decent weight. No vermin that you can feel. There's a stain on the inside of the left pocket. You fold it out and look at it. A dark, irregular patch, hardened to the touch. You note it in the ledger. You place it in the repair pile because the pocket lining needs attention, but the exterior is worth saving. You pick up the next piece. Outside, Wentworth Street is going about its Monday morning with the particular energy of a street that has a purpose and is pursuing it. You can hear it through the walls, the cartwheels and the voices and the dogs and the distant bells from Christchurch Spitalfields, which mark the hours and the half-hours and the quarter-hours, and which you have internalised so completely that you don't hear them consciously anymore, only notice their absence on the rare occasions when you're far enough away for them to be inaudible. The button in your apron pocket is still there. You've decided not to mention it to Mrs. Brennan, not because you have a plan involving it, but because it doesn't feel like something to mention. Not yet. Aggie comes back from her errand, a delivery to one of Mrs. Brennan's better customers, a woman on Commercial Road who won't come to the shop but accepts delivery, and sheds her coat and her scarf and takes her place at the mending table and reaches for the repair pile without pausing. "Did you hear about the man they found in the river yesterday?" she says. The hands in your apron pocket touching the button go very still. "No," you say. "South of the bridge. Watermen found him tangled up in the piers around dawn." She threads her needle with a quick, practised movement. Gentlemen, apparently, or had been. Good clothes, they said. "They said," you repeat, trying to make your voice the right kind of flat. "My mother's neighbour's son works the Billingsgate wharves. He heard from someone who heard from one of the watermen." She begins sewing. "They found a button too, separate from the body, not matching the coat he was wearing. Your fingers close around the gilt button." "What kind of button?" you ask. Aggie shrugs one shoulder. Her needle goes in. "Naval, they thought. Ship on it. Strange thing to have in your pocket." The needle comes out. The thread pulls through. The sorting room is very quiet except for the sounds of cloth and work and the distant persistence of the street. You open your hand and look at the button. A sailing ship, gilt, worn smooth at the centre where a thumb has rubbed it 100 times, 1,000 times. The habit of a man who kept a thing in his pocket and touched it repeatedly, the way people do with objects that mean something, coins and small stones and photographs and things that once belonged to someone else. You close your hand again. "Aggie," you say. "The man they found. Did they say his name?" She looks up from her work, looks at you, looks at your closed hand. A pause. "No," she says. "They didn't say his name." She goes back to her sewing. You go back to your sorting. The morning continues. This is the point where I tell you about the thing I've been putting off telling you, which is the part of the second-hand clothes trade that people in 1848 are only beginning to understand and mostly trying not to think about. The thing about clothing is that it holds on to what it's been in contact with. You've learned this as a matter of practical training. The stain remains, the smell persists, the shape of the former body lingers in the cloth. But there is another, more dangerous version of this principle, one that is at the heart of a debate that is happening right now, in 1848, in the lecture halls of medical schools and in the pages of the medical press and in the Parliament that is considering yet again whether to do something about the state of London's water. The debate is about cholera. Cholera has been in London before. In 1832, an outbreak killed over 5,000 people. In 1848, as you're standing in this sorting room, the second great epidemic is beginning. It will kill over 14,000 in London alone before it is finished. The mechanism is not understood yet. The theory that will eventually prove correct, that cholera is spread through contaminated water, is the theory of a physician named John Snow, who is currently working in Soho and whose great demonstration of this principle, the Broad Street pump, is still 6 years in the future. In 1848, the prevailing theory is miasma, that cholera spreads through bad air, through the smells of rot and filth and disease, through the exhalations of contaminated ground. This theory is wrong about the mechanism, but not entirely wrong about the correlation. The places with the worst smells in London, the courts and alleys of Whitechapel, of St Giles, of Southwark, are indeed the places where cholera strikes hardest. Not because of the smells, but because the same poverty that produces the smells also produces the contaminated water. But the miasma theory, combined with the practical evidence that cholera devastates the poorest and most crowded areas of the city, has produced a secondary theory that has more immediate relevance to your daily work. Some people believe that clothing from cholera victims can transmit the disease to whoever handles it next. They're not, as it happens, entirely wrong. The bacterium that causes cholera, Vibrio cholerae, though nobody in 1848 knows that name or that it exists, can survive in fabric for a period. Not indefinitely, but for days under the right conditions. The mechanisms by which it passes from fabric to new victim are specific and require the kind of contact that most handling of second-hand clothes doesn't involve. But the broad shape of the fear is not irrational. In 1848, if you are in the second-hand clothes trade, you know this fear exists. You feel it in the behaviour of your customers, who handle the stock carefully and sometimes ask questions about origin that would have been unusual 5 years ago. You feel it in the behaviour of the collectors, who are sometimes reluctant to take stock from certain addresses. You feel it in the sulphur fumigation that Mrs. Brennan applies to the suspect pile. A fumigation that is believed to kill the miasma in the fabric, to neutralise whatever dangerous quality the diseased air has communicated to the cloth. You have not yet had a direct encounter with this dimension of the trade. You have been working through the ordinary rotation of stock without anything that has flagged itself in this way. But the morning is not over yet, and this week is not like other weeks, and the blue coat is at the bottom of the Rag Lane pile, and there is a dead man in the river with a missing button, and something is coming. You just don't know what it is yet. That afternoon, Monday afternoon, the 4th of February, Mrs. Brennan calls you through to the shop floor. The shop front of 43 Wentworth Street is a long, narrow room, the front window giving onto the street, the walls lined floor to ceiling with shelves of folded and hanging clothes. There's a counter across the middle, separating the retail space from the working space behind, with a narrow hatch in it for passing things back and forth. The floor is bare wood, worn in the same paths as the sorting room floor. There are 2 oil lamps on the counter for cloudy days and late afternoons. Mrs. Brennan is behind the counter, and there is a customer on the other side of it who you've not seen before. He's a man of perhaps 45, well dressed by the standards of this part of London, meaning his coat is good wool and recently brushed, and his boots are real leather and clean. He has a professional quality about him, the quality of someone whose work requires a certain standard of presentation. A clerk, possibly, or a tradesman who deals with the public. He's holding his hat in both hands. He looks at you when you come through. "This is Sarah," Mrs. Brennan says to him. "She's been with me since September. Good girl, she can help you." She looks at you. Mr. Collins is looking for a complete suit. Wool, dark colour. His brother's about your size, maybe an inch taller. She says this in a tone that translates, if you know how to translate it, to, "I am giving you this customer. Show me what you can do." You take a breath. "Mr. Collins," you say, "come round to this side of the counter and I'll show you what we have." He comes around. You take him to the section of the shop where the men's suits are arranged, not folded but hanging, which is Mrs. Brennan's approach for the better pieces, because hanging shows the line of a garment in a way that folding doesn't, and customers buy with their eyes first. "What's the occasion?" you ask. He looks slightly surprised. "I beg your pardon?" "The suit. What's it for?" "A suit for daily work wants a different fabric from a suit for a wedding or a funeral." "What's your brother doing in it?" He thinks about this. He's just been appointed to a clerk's position. He'll be wearing it every day. Then you want something that wears well. Heavy wool, not light. Dark enough to not show dirt, but not black. Black goes green in a few months and it looks cheap. You're moving along the rail as you talk, your hands touching the fabrics as you pass them. Something like this. You stop at a dark charcoal grey, a good weight. You can feel it when you lift the jacket off the rail, a solid, serious cloth. You hold it up. "Where did this come from?" Mr. Collins asks. "A man who worked in the city." This is what Mrs. Brennan has told you. This is the truth where you know it, and a reasonable inference where you don't. Good position, good money, didn't skimp on his clothes. He grew out of it, or out of the job, or both. This is also something you've learned. The stories. Not always the true stories, you often don't know the true stories, but the plausible ones. The ones that give the customer a way to picture the garment's former life in a way that doesn't trouble them. A suit from a man who outgrew it. A dress from a woman who went abroad. A coat from a household that was simply too well stocked and needed to clear space. The trick is to make the story feel like information rather than salesmanship. Mrs. Brennan is the master of this. You are learning it. Mr. Collins takes the jacket, holds it at arm's length, examines the seams, the buttons, the lining, which is dark grey silk matching the exterior. His hands are careful. He knows what he's looking at, more or less. "There's a mark on the cuff," he says. "There is. Ink. But the tailor on White Lion Street can take the cuff apart and turn it, reverse the fabric, and you won't see it at all. The cost of that work is about 3p." He considers this. The trousers. You find the trousers, matching, folded on a shelf below the rail. You shake them out, hold them up, good cut. A small wear mark at the right knee, invisible when standing. "Both together," you say, and you name a price. He's quiet for a moment. You let the silence sit. You've learned this from Mrs. Brennan. Say the price, and then stop talking. The first person to talk after the price loses something. Not always the sale, but something. "The trousers need pressing," he says. "They do. Mrs. Brennan can do that before you collect if you want to come back tomorrow." He names a lower figure, you think. "The wholesale cost of this suit to Mrs. Brennan was, you know this from the ledger, approximately half what you've just asked for. The suit needs pressing and possible minor work. The margin is enough to bargain with, but not infinitely." "I can go down," you say, "if you take it as is, without the pressing. Or I hold the price and you come back tomorrow and it's pressed and ready to wear. He looks at you, a small surprise in his expression. How long have you been in the trade? He asks. 4 months. He looks back at the suit, makes the decision. The original price with pressing. I'll come back tomorrow. I'll write you a receipt, you say. You go behind the counter and write the receipt in the ledger and in the small carbon copybook that Mrs. Brennan uses for customer records. You take his deposit, half the price, as is standard, and you fold the suit carefully and mark it with his name on a small card tucked into the jacket pocket and put it on the reserved shelf. He puts his hat back on and leaves. Mrs. Brennan is behind you. You didn't hear her come in from the sorting room. Well, she says, the price holds. He's coming back tomorrow. A pause. Then, you remembered about the cuff. I noticed it when I was sorting it last week. You remembered. She says this in a tone that doesn't sound like praise and yet is not nothing. She goes back to the sorting room. You stand at the counter and feel something warm and slightly uncomfortable. Something that might be pride or might be its quieter cousin. The satisfaction of having done a thing correctly. Outside, the afternoon is doing its February best, which is a low orange light that promises darkness in the next hour and delivers. The last customers of the day come and go, a woman buying a cotton dress, a man looking for boots who doesn't find what he wants and leaves without buying, 2 girls who look at things for a long time and leave with nothing, which is fine, that happens, they might come back. At 5, Mrs. Brennan closes the shutters, and that's where I'll leave you for tonight, with the shutters coming down on Wentworth Street and the day's takings in the money box and the blue coat still at the bottom of the Rag Lane pile, and the gilt button still in your apron pocket and Monday folding itself up into the cold dark of February in London. Tuesday begins with a smell you haven't encountered before. You notice it the moment you come downstairs from your room, before you've reached the bottom step, before your eyes have adjusted to the dark of the ground floor. It cuts through the ordinary morning smells of the building, the coal smoke from the kitchen range, the bread that Mrs. Brennan puts on at 5 o'clock, the cold stone and old wood smell of the walls themselves. It cuts through all of that with the authority of something that does not belong here. Camphor. You know camphor. Everyone in the trade knows camphor. It's what you pack around stored woolens to discourage moth. It smells medicinal and sharp and slightly sacred. The way a church might smell if a church were trying to preserve fabric. In small quantities, used correctly, it is the smell of good housekeeping. This quantity is not small. You push open the door to the sorting room and it hits you full in the face. A wall of camphor so dense it makes your eyes water. The room is dark still, the windows giving nothing at this hour, and it takes your eyes a moment to pass the shapes. The sorting table is clear. The sorted piles are gone. The shelves along the east wall have been reorganised, and in the corner where the Rag Lane pile was yesterday there is nothing, just floor, cold, bare stone floor. The Rag Lane pile went out last night, after you went upstairs, after you ate your supper and exchanged a few words with Aggie and climbed to your room and lay down and slept. Sometime in those hours, the pile went out. The blue coat went with it. You stand in the doorway of the camphor-drenched sorting room and you feel something that isn't quite relief and isn't quite disappointment. A middle state, an unresolved thing. Aggie is already at her table, wrapped in her coat because the room is cold before the fire takes hold, her breath making small clouds. She doesn't look up. She called the Rag Lane man at 9 last night, Aggie says. He came with his cart. Did you see? I heard the cart in the yard. She turns a piece of fabric over in her hands, examining the underside. She was up early this morning. Before 5. I heard her moving. You come in properly, close the door behind you, go to the fireplace and do the thing with your hands. Press, rub, shake, press, until some warmth comes back into them. The camphor smell is making the back of your throat tighten. Why the camphor, you ask? Aggie is quiet for a moment. She sometimes does that after certain stock goes out. Clean the room. To kill the miasma. That's what she calls it. You don't say anything else. You go to the fire and hold your hands over it, closer than is comfortable, until the aching in your knuckles eases. The sorting room smells of camphor and cold, and the faint sweet smoke of the coal. Mrs. Brennan comes in from the yard at 7:30. Her face gives nothing away, same as always. She walks directly to the corner where the rag lane pile was, looks at the floor for a moment, then looks at you. "Stock ledger," she says. "The entry for yesterday's bulk consignment. Make sure it's complete. I'll check it." She goes to the front of the shop without any further comment, and that is the end of it. The end of the blue coat, the end of the river smell, the end of whatever the thin man with the still eyes delivered to her yesterday morning. You check the stock ledger. The entry is complete. You close the ledger. You put your hand in your apron pocket. The gilt button is still there. You take it out and look at it properly in the pale morning light. It's about the size of a florin, slightly smaller. The gilt is worn unevenly, bright where the surface is protected by the design's raised edges, dull where the smooth areas have been touched repeatedly. The sailing ship in the centre is in profile, a 3-masted vessel under full sail, the detail crisp enough that you can make out individual ropes in the rigging if you look closely. Naval uniform, certainly. But there are gradations even in naval uniform, and the quality of this button suggests something above the ordinary seaman. An officer's button, maybe, or a petty officer. Someone who wore this with pride for a long time and then stopped and kept the button anyway, carrying it in his pocket as a reminder of what he'd been. You have no way of knowing who the man was. You have no way of knowing whether the coat from the river and the man found in the river are the same man or two. Separate unfortunate stories that happen to arrive in your orbit on the same Monday morning. Aggie's Waterman second-hand account is the sum total of your information, and second-hand accounts in this neighbourhood are about as reliable as February weather. But you have the button. You stand there for a moment, this small gilt thing in your palm, and you make a decision that you don't fully understand, but that feels clear to you in the way that certain decisions do. Not thought through, not reasoned, just arrived at. You're going to keep it. You don't know why. You're going to keep it until you understand why. You put it back in your apron pocket and you start the morning's work. The incoming pile on Tuesday is smaller than Monday's. 3 bundles from 2 collectors, a small box of hat-related items, bonnets, caps, a single tall hat in surprisingly good condition, and a parcel that Mrs. Brennan brings through herself from the front of the shop without explanation, and sets on the corner of the table with a look that means, "Look at this later, when you have time, when I'm not in here." You look at it when she's gone to deal with the first customer of the day. It's wrapped in brown paper, tied with string. Inside, carefully folded, a woman's dress, dark purple silk, the colour of bruised plums, with a small, precise pattern woven into it, repeating diamonds in a slightly deeper shade. The cut is some years out of date. The sleeves have the fullness at the shoulder that's fashionable in the earlier part of the decade, but it is extraordinary fabric, and it is in extraordinary condition. You run your thumb along the inner seam. Silk of this quality has a whisper to it when it slides between your fingers, a sound so faint it's almost felt rather than heard. The lining is cream silk, clean and unfrayed. The buttons are jet black glass, perfectly matched, all present. This dress was worn carefully, by someone who understood what it was and what it was worth. You hold it up in the light from the window. The purple shifts as the angle changes, the woven diamonds appearing and disappearing. Somewhere in London, a woman wore this dress to places where this kind of dress was expected. Dinners, maybe, the theatre, calls, events that required a certain presentation. And now it is here. You fold it carefully and place it in the best goods section of the shelves, where Mrs. Brennan will price it when she comes through. You don't write a standard entry for it in the main ledger. You write a separate note on a small card that you place inside the fold, as Mrs. Brennan has shown you is the practice for items of uncertain provenance or exceptional quality. Date received, condition at receipt, estimated origin. For origin, you write private source not specified. You leave the parcel wrapping in the pile to be disposed of, and you return to the main incoming pile, and you don't wonder too much about the purple silk dress. You have 5 months of practice at not wondering too much. Wednesday brings the rag merchants. The rag merchants come every 2 weeks on Wednesday afternoons to collect whatever has accumulated in the Rag Lane pile and pay for it by weight. This week, because the pile went out early on Monday night, there is less for them than usual. But they still come because the rhythm of the trade doesn't accommodate exceptions. There are 2 of them who work Mrs. Brennan's account. A man called Tibbs, who is perhaps 60, weathered as a fence post, with a voice like something being dragged over gravel, and his son, or at least a young man who accompanies him and is introduced as his son, who never speaks, but is physically enormous in the way that the work of carrying heavy things eventually produces in a person. They come with a cart. The cart has, at this point in its life, given up pretending to be anything other than a vehicle for transporting the least appealing categories of second-hand goods, and it communicates this comprehensively through smell. You have learned to breathe through your mouth when the Tibbs cart is in the yard. Tibbs examines the pile with the professional efficiency of a man who has been examining rag piles for 4 decades. He does it quickly. Lift, feel, discard into the weighing basket. Lift, feel, discard, with occasional pauses over specific items that get a second look and either a brief approving nod or a slight toss that lands them in a different basket, a smaller one. What's the separate basket, you ask him, the first time you see this. He looks at you over the pile. Shoddy, he says. You know the word. Shoddy is wool fabric that has been processed, torn apart into its constituent fibres, respun and rewoven into new cloth. It is cheaper than new wool, less durable, but serviceable for certain purposes. The raw material of shoddy is old wool garments. The better the original wool, the better the shoddy. Those pieces are worth more, you ask? He shrugs one shoulder. Worth more to the right buyer. Mungo and Shoddy mills in Yorkshire pay a premium for good clean wool in any condition, even well worn. They send buyers down. He drops another piece into the shoddy basket. These go separate because the price per pound is better. Why doesn't Mrs. Brennan keep them separate herself and sell directly? He looks at you again, a longer look this time, something between assessment and amusement. Because that's my trade, not hers. She sells me the lot, I sort what's what, I pay her the higher rate per pound on the better stuff. He drops a final piece. Been doing it this way for 23 years. Works for everybody. You watch him work. There's a knowledge in his hands that is the same kind of knowledge that Mrs. Brennan has, that Mr. Hartigan has, that every person in this trade seems to carry. The knowledge of what things are without having to think about it, built up over years until the thinking has retreated and only the knowing remains. This is what you are building, one piece of cloth at a time. After the Tibbs cart leaves, wheels protesting, sun silent, load considerably reduced from its arrival state, Mrs. Brennan counts the payment into the cash box and records it in the ledger, and then stands for a moment looking at the now empty corner of the sorting room where the pile was. "Sarah," she says, "Mrs. Brennan. On Friday I'm sending you to Petticoat Lane, not our stall, the other end. Benny Isaac's stall. He's got something I want you to look at." "What kind of something?" "Woolen coats. He says he's got a new source, better quality than he's been able to offer. I want to know if it's true." "You want me to examine them?" "I want to know what you think, whether the quality matches the price he's going to name. This is new. This is not an errand, not a delivery, not a simple transaction. This is judgment. She wants your judgment." "What if I'm wrong?" you ask. She looks at you. "If you're wrong, I'll correct you and explain why. That's how you learn." She picks up her pen and goes back to the ledger. "It's not the Old Bailey." You go back to the sorting table. Friday's 2 days away. You think about Benny Isaac's stall, which you've passed at the market but haven't stopped at, and about woolen coats, and about the look of things and the feel of things, and whether 4 months is enough to trust yourself. You think Mrs. Brennan thinks it might be. That's something. That evening, after the shop is closed and supper is done, you sit in the small back parlour that Mrs. Brennan uses as an office, a room barely large enough for a desk, 2 chairs, and the shelves of records that line 2 walls, the accumulated paperwork of 30 years in the trade, because she has invited you in, which she does occasionally, on evenings when the work is done and she has something she wants to say. She says things in the parlour that she doesn't say on the shop floor or in the sorting room. Not much more, but different in kind. In the parlour, she occasionally speaks in a way that resembles conversation. She pours 2 cups of tea from a pot that has been on the hob since dinner, and which is now strong enough to stand a spoon in. She gives you one without asking if you want it. You have learned to want it. "Tuesday next," she says. "The lane. I want you on the stall from opening to close. You won't be there. I'll be there in the morning. I have a meeting at noon." She drinks her tea. "You'll manage the afternoon trade alone." The afternoon trade on a Sunday lane is 3 hours of maximum volume. The most crowded part of the day, the most complex transactions, the full weight of the market. "I'll manage," you say, because this is what you say. She looks at you over her cup. "You'll make mistakes." "I'll try to make them small ones." Something crosses her face. It might be the nearest thing she has to a smile, which is a slight relaxation around the eyes, a fractional softening of the line of her mouth. It lasts about 1 second. "What do you want from this trade?" she asks. The question catches you sideways. You're not used to being asked what you want. In 5 months here, in the weeks on the carrier's wagon before that, in the months before that, when everything was coming apart in Shropshire, nobody has asked what you want. They've asked what you can do, what you have, what you're willing to accept, but not what you want. To know it properly, you say, after a pause, the whole trade, not just sorting and selling, all of it. Where things come from and where they go and why the prices are what they are and what makes something worth more than something that looks the same. She's quiet for a moment, drinks her tea. That'll take years, she says. I know. Another pause. Why did you come to London, she asks. The real reason, not the letter, not the family circumstances, the reason underneath those. You think about Hodnet, about the fields you grew up walking through, and the people you grew up knowing, and the particular smallness of a life in which everything is already determined before you're old enough to have opinions about it. About the feeling, which arrived when you were perhaps 14 and never left, that the life being prepared for you was not one you had chosen, and not one you could choose, that the walls were already built before you arrived. I wanted there to be more options, you say. Mrs. Brennan sets down her cup, looks at the wall of records behind her desk, 30 years of ledgers and receipts and accounts, her hands in her lap. When I came over, she says, I had 1 shilling and 4pence. I've told you that before. Yes. What I haven't told you is that for the first 6 months I couldn't get regular work, and I slept in a room in a court off Aldgate with 11 other people. And there were nights when I ate nothing at all. She says this without effect, reporting a fact. The city doesn't give you more options. That's not how it works. She looks at you now. What it gives you is the possibility of options. If you're willing to work for them, if you're smart about it, if you're lucky. A pause. And if you know when not to ask questions. This last is said with a very slight additional weight. You hold it. The coat from Monday, you say. She looks at you without expression. I'm not asking about it, you say. I just want you to know that I'm not asking. A pause. Outside Wentworth Street is settling into its Tuesday evening self. A cart going by. A voice. Silence. Good, she says. She picks up her cup. Go to bed. Sorting starts at 7. You go to bed. You lie in your room and listen to the building settle around you and the city murmur outside the window, and you think about the button in your apron pocket, and you think about 1 shilling and 4pence and 11 people in a room and 30 years of ledgers. You think about options and the possibility of options and the long, slow work of building something out of nothing. And then you stop thinking and you sleep. The next morning, Thursday, the 7th of February, a boy brings a message to the shop just before noon. He is perhaps 10 years old, lean as wire, with the look of a street boy about him, the self-sufficient watchfulness, the clothes that are functional rather than anything else, the quick calculation in his eyes when he comes through the door about whether this place is worth more than the penny he's going to be paid to deliver the message. He decides it isn't, or isn't in any way he can act on right now, and he hands over the folded note and waits with his hand out. Mrs. Brennan reads the note, pays the boy. He leaves at speed. She stands behind the counter for a moment with the note, and you, who are sorting a pile of small goods on the counter, buttons, buckles, trim, the accessories that come in with every collection, and need their own accounting, you watch her face do nothing particular, and you learn from that nothing. I need to go out, she says. For about 2 hours, you're on the counter. Yes, Mrs. Brennan. She puts on her good coat, the dark grey wool with the black astrakhan collar, the coat she wears when she's going somewhere that requires a certain presentation, and her good bonnet, and she leaves through the front door. Aggie appears at the sorting room door with her eyebrows raised. Midday on a Thursday, she says. Unusual. She's been sent for, you say. By who? You shrug. You genuinely don't know. Aggie goes back to the sorting room. You stand behind the counter and you wait for customers. The 2 hours that follow are, in terms of trade, unremarkable. A woman who buys a length of blue cotton, a man who examines 3 waistcoats and takes none of them, A pair of young girls who are looking for something for their mother and need considerable guidance through the available stock before settling on a grey wool shawl that you suggest when they describe her as a woman who finds patterns too busy and needs something she can wear to church. You wrap the shawl in paper and they leave pleased, which is the goal. In between customers, the shop is quiet in the particular way that a place with two people in it is quiet. Not silent, not empty, but not full either. A quiet that has presence. Aggie sounds from the sorting room, the street outside, the church bells marking the half hour. Your hand finds the button in your apron pocket. You've been touching it so often in the past 3 days that you've started mapping it without meaning to. The smooth centre, the worn ridge where the ship's hull meets the water, the slight roughness along one edge where the gilt has flaked. You know this button in the dark. A thought occurs to you. A thought that you've been pushing away since Tuesday morning, but that won't be pushed away any further. If the coat was from a dead man, and the dead man was the man found in the river, and the thin man who brought the coat in knew that, which his two still eyes and his too eager departure suggested, then the thin man did not come by that coat honestly. This is not, in the geography of the rag trade, unusual. Clothes come off bodies in ways that aren't always official. The resurrection men, before the law was tightened, would take anything useful from the bodies they dug up. Men who work the river, the mudlarks, the water thieves, the men who operate in the margins of the legal economy along the Thames, they find things, they take things. This is understood. But the button was in the coat pocket, not attached to the coat, separate, belonging to something else kept separately. A sailor's button, kept by a man who had perhaps once been a sailor, or known one, or loved one. A small private thing, and it ended up here, in your apron pocket. You turn it over in your fingers under the counter, while a woman browses the skirt section. You are not, you think, in a position to do anything with this information. You do not know the dead man's name. You do not know who the thin man was. The coat is gone. The circumstance, whatever it was, is resolved in the way that these circumstances are resolved here, quietly, professionally, without excessive drama. And that is what Mrs. Brennan meant when she said not to ask questions. But the button is still here, and the dead man, whoever he was, kept it in his pocket for a reason that mattered to him. The woman buys a skirt. You wrap it. She leaves. The shop is quiet. You think, possibly the question isn't who the man was. Possibly the question is who is looking for him. This is a new thought. You sit with it for a moment, uncomfortable. If a man goes into the Thames and nobody comes asking, then he was a man who didn't have people, which is common enough in London. Half the city is made of people who came here from somewhere else and left their people behind. Men who go into the river, one way or another, and are found by watermen and pass through systems that process them efficiently and without ceremony, and are buried in the corners of churchyards without markers, and that is the end of it. But if someone is looking, Mrs. Brennan comes back at 2:30. Her face is still giving nothing away, which is normal, but there is something in the set of her shoulders that wasn't there this morning, a quality of resolved tension, a decision that has been made quality. She takes off her good coat. She comes behind the counter. She looks at you. "The coal merchant," she says. "Did he come while I was out?" "No." "He'll come tomorrow morning. Tell him I'm not buying at his current price." "Understood." She opens the ledger. She begins reviewing the day's transactions. Normal, all normal. You're behind the counter and she is at the ledger, and the shop is doing what it always does, and you decide, this time clearly and deliberately, to say nothing. You do what she asked you to do. You take what she's shown you and you learn from it. You protect the button in your pocket and you go forward. The days continue. Friday morning, Mrs. Brennan sends you to Petticoat Lane. Not Sunday, not the market in full roar, but Friday. The lane on a working day when it's still busy, always busy, but operating at its weekday scale. The permanent shops are open. A few of the regular stall holders who operate every day have their pitches set up along the street. The Irish women with their piles of clothing arranged on the pavement or hung from lines strung between buildings. The dealers who have no fixed premises but work from a single large basket or a barrow. The trade going on at whatever pace the street and the weather permit. It is cold. The kind of cold that promises snow and then withholds it, leaving you with the cold and none of the visual compensation. The sky is the colour of old pewter. Your breath makes clouds. You know Petticoat Lane on Sundays. On Sundays it is overwhelming, chaotic, a complete system. On a Friday morning in February it is something else, itself at rest, its weekday self, which is still dense and noisy and multiply fragrant, but which has the quality of potential rather than actuality. You can see the structure beneath the Sunday market, the underlying bones of it. The lane has a direction to it, a flow. Goods come in from the top and the sides and distribute themselves downward through the layers of the market. The best goods are at the dealer's end, the permanent shops, the established stallholders with good pitches and solid reputations, people like Mrs. Brennan's peers. The middling goods are in the middle of the market, sold by smaller dealers operating on smaller margins, and at the bottom, in the courts and alleys off the lane proper, in the less visible spaces, the goods that no longer have a clear category, the indeterminate clothing, the pieces that could be valued several different ways depending on who you were and what you needed. Benny Isaacs's stall is on the eastern stretch of the lane, between a permanent shop selling hats and a woman called Mrs. Levy, who deals exclusively in women's wear of a particular type, dress lengths, fabric remnants, and the kind of items that can be altered significantly before they are worn again. Benny himself is a man of perhaps 35 with a quick, precise manner and a way of arranging his stock that you recognize as skilled. The good pieces visible from a distance, the less good pieces accessible but not leading. He knows who you are. Mrs. Brennan has sent word. Sarah Marsh, he says, when you introduce yourself. Not a question. Good. Come and look at these. He takes you behind the stall, the narrow working space between the display and the wall at his back, and shows you what he wants you to see. There are 12 coats, heavy wool, all of them, various shades of dark, navies, blacks, deep greys, folded in a pile with one of each spread out for examination. You pick up the first one, hold it at arm's length, then bring it close. Feel the weight first, and it's good. The weight is very good. This is heavy cloth, something between a coat weight and an overcoat weight, substantial. You run your thumb along the grain. Good tight weave. You feel the seam. This isn't English wool, you say, before you've quite decided to say it. Benny watches you. His expression is careful. You look at the texture again. The particular quality of the wool, a slightly longer fibre than you're used to, a different characteristic nap. German maybe, or Flemish? Flemish, he says. Correct. How do you know? The fibre length is different. English broadcloth has a shorter nap. This has more to it. You fold back the collar, look at the lining, good linen. Where are they from? A consignment came through from Rotterdam, intermediary I work with. He says this in a tone that has the same quality as Mrs. Brennan's descriptions of usual sources, accurate as far as it goes and deliberately not further. You examine 3 more coats. The quality is consistent. The construction is solid. Good stitching. Well-finished seams. No shortcuts taken. Condition, you ask? 3 are new. Unsold warehouse stock. The rest are worn, but not significantly. He pauses. The warehouse lot came from a cloth merchant who was liquidating. Legitimate stock. The worn ones, a slight pause, collected from the usual channels. You examine the worn ones carefully. The kind of examination Mrs. Brennan has taught you. The seams, the pockets, the lining, the collar, the underarm area. You smell them, carefully, briefly, the way she's shown you. Not the deep inhalation that tells you everything, which would be too revealing, but a quick, functional read. These coats are from working men. The smell is work and cold and the particular flatness of clothes that are cleaned occasionally but not frequently. No vermin, no illness smell, no river. What's the price, you ask? He names a figure per coat, for the full 12. You hold the number. You think about what Mrs. Brennan pays for similar English wool coats through her normal channels. You think about the difference in quality, which is real, the Flemish wool is better, against the difference in origin, which is uncertain in ways that make you want to price in a margin for uncertainty. For the 3 warehouse coats, that's fair, you say. For the 9 worn ones, I'd want it lower by about $1 apiece. Why? Because I don't know where the worn ones came from, and neither do you, not really, and that uncertainty costs something. Not much, but something. He looks at you for a long moment. Then he says, Brennan trained you well. She's still training me. He names a revised figure that meets your counter for the worn ones and holds on the warehouse stock. I'll tell her, you say. She'll decide. Tell her also, I can get more of the warehouse stock if she wants it. The merchant is still liquidating. It won't last. You note this. You button your coat and step back into the cold of the lane. On the way back to Wentworth Street, you pass a court off the lane, one of the narrow openings between buildings that lead back into the hidden geography behind the main street. You pass them all the time, these courts. They are part of the landscape, unremarkable to a practiced eye. But something catches you. At the entrance to this particular court, sitting on a step, is an old woman, very old, the kind of old that's hard to assign a number to. She has a pile of clothing on her lap and she's doing something to the top piece with both hands. You slow down, despite yourself, to see what she's doing. She's picking through the seams of a shirt. Her fingers are moving along every seam, feeling, pausing occasionally, continuing. She's checking for vermin, running a full seam-by-seam examination of a single shirt. Her hands are remarkable. 90 years old, maybe more, gnarled at the knuckles, the skin translucent and spotted, but moving through the fabric with a precision and certainty that speaks of so many years of this work that the hands have developed their own independent expertise. They barely need her attention. She's looking somewhere else, at the court behind her, at something in the middle distance, while her hands do their work alone. She's wearing 4 coats at once, 4 separate coats layered over each other. The outermost one grey wool, enormous on her small frame, the collar of the layer beneath it visible at her throat in dark blue, and beneath that the suggestion of at least 2 more layers. and a shawl over all of it. This is warmth as strategy. When your home is a court off Petticoat Lane and the cold is February and you are 90 years old, you wear everything you have. You stand there for perhaps 10 seconds, watching her hands in the seams. Then she looks up, straight at you. Her eyes are very bright, very dark, and completely alert. "What are you looking at?" she says. Her accent is something you can't quite place. Not Irish and not English. Older than both, or from elsewhere. The accent of someone who has been speaking whatever language the people around them speak for so long that it has overlaid the original without quite erasing it. "Your hands," you say, honestly. She looks at you, looks at your apron under your coat, which tells her what you are. "How long?" she asks. 4 months. "Who with?" "Mrs. Brennan, Wentworth Street." She makes a small sound that might be approval. "Brennan." She looks back down at her hands, which have not stopped moving. She's a good woman to learn from. Hard, but fair. "Yes," you say. "How much did she pay you this week?" You tell her. She shakes her head slowly. "When I started in the trade," she says, "that would have been good money. That was 70 years ago." She says this without bitterness, as a simple fact. 70 years. "I was in the trade before your grandmother's mother was born." You believe her. "What do you know?" she asks, after 4 months. "Fabrics," you say. "How to sort, how to price a little, how to deal with customers. What else, you think? When to ask questions." She looks up at you again, a long considering look. "And when not to," you add. She makes the approving sound again. Her hands are finished with the shirt. She places it carefully on a smaller pile beside her. The good pile, you understand. The pile that is clear, and picks up the next piece. "Come back when you know more," she says. She doesn't mean it as an invitation exactly, more as a condition. When you know more, you will be worth talking to further. You go back to Wentworth Street. You think about 70 years in the trade. You think about the hands that know without being told. You report to Mrs. Brennan on Benny Isaac's coats. The price, the quality, the provenance, the offer on additional warehouse stock. She listens with her eyes on the ledger, not looking up. "And your assessment," she says. "Not just the price, the coats." "The warehouse stock is genuinely good," you say. "Worth the price. The worn ones are fine, but I priced in a margin for uncertainty on origin, and he accepted it." She looks up at that. "He accepted it." "Yes." She writes something in the ledger. "I'll take the warehouse stock. 6 of the worn ones. Negotiate the other 3 down further or let them go." She writes another note. "And I'll look at the next lot of warehouse stock when he has it." She closes the ledger. Well done. You go back to the sorting room. You feel the same warm, uncomfortable thing you felt after the Collins sale. That middle thing between pride and its quieter cousin. You sit with it for a moment at the sorting table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that Aggie has put there without comment, and you let it be there. The weekends. Sunday comes. Sunday on the lane. You've done this now for 4 months. You know the getting up in the dark, the loading of the cart, the squealing wheel through the pre-dawn streets. You know the smell of the market before the light comes, which is the smell of everything the market contains plus the cold, a combination that has its own character, dense and complex and particular to this place and no other. But this Sunday is different, because Mrs. Brennan leaves at noon. She says nothing theatrical about it. She simply reaches a natural pause in the morning's transactions, looks at the position of the sun through the gap between the buildings and says, "I'll be back by 3. You have this," and she goes. You watch her walking away through the crowd, her good coat, her purposeful pace, the way the market adjusts around her without her appearing to notice, and then she rounds a corner and she's gone, and you are alone at the stall. The market is at its maximum, about noon on a Sunday. The crowd is so dense that movement through it requires technique, not pushing but angling, finding the small spaces between bodies and moving through them in sequence, reading the flow of the crowd the way you'd read a current. The noise is continuous and total. You take a breath. You put both hands flat on the counter of the stall. A woman stops and picks up a cotton blouse, holds it up, looks at you. "How much?" she asks. You tell her. She counters. You counter. She looks at the blouse for a moment, her eyes going over it the way people's eyes go over things they want but are deciding whether to want. "This is good quality," you say. "Feel the seam here. That's double-stitched. That's a blouse that won't fall apart the first time it's properly washed." She feels the seam, looks at you again, looks at the blouse. "Fine," she says. You take the money, you wrap the blouse in paper, she moves on, and the next person is already there, and the next, and the next. For 3 hours, you work the stall alone. You make mistakes. A coat that you underpriced, you realize it 2 transactions after it's gone. When you have a moment to think and you reconstruct the exchange and understand that the customer knew exactly what it was worth and you didn't. A length of fabric that you couldn't identify quickly enough and priced too conservatively. A man who asked a question about provenance that you answered too honestly. "I'm not entirely sure," when the correct answer was a confident summary of what you did know. But for every mistake there are 10 transactions that go correctly, some of them fluently, some of them with the kind of ease that comes from the work having settled into your body enough to run itself. At 2:30, a woman picks up the purple silk dress. You have brought it out on Mrs. Brennan's instruction. If nothing better sells it this week, try it at the stall. You have set it out at the back of the display, where the colour catches the light, where people's eyes find it, and then have to travel through the stall's other offerings to reach it. The woman who picks it up is perhaps 35, well dressed, better dressed than most of the Lane Sunday customers. She has a quality of purposeful shopping about her, the kind of person who knows what the Lane offers and comes specifically for it rather than drifting through. Her gloves are good leather. Her coat is relatively recent. She holds the dress up, turns it. You watch the purple change in the February light, the woven diamonds appearing and disappearing as the angle shifts. "This has been well kept," she says. "Yes," you say. "Where did it come from?" You think of Mrs. Brennan. You think of the parcel wrapped in brown paper and the note on the corner of the table. You think of private source, not specified. "It was given to a good home," you say, which is a thing you've learned from Mrs. Brennan, the true statement that is also the complete statement, the answer that answers the question that was actually asked rather than the question underneath it. Someone who understood what it was. The woman looks at you with the kind of attention that suggests she is evaluating not just the dress, but you. "It's out of fashion," she says. "The cut is. The fabric is not. Fabric like this never goes out of fashion." You step around the counter and take the dress from her gently, hold it at an angle. The silk is this quality in the weave, which you don't see in cheaper goods. The colour hasn't faded. That's the quality of the dye. Acid dye, probably, which holds better than cheaper vegetable dye. And the cut. You pause, look at it. It's 5 years out of date at the shoulder, but a tailor could reset the sleeves in 2 hours and charge you less than a shilling, and then you have a dress that will last another 10 years. She's looking at the dress, not at you. Her hands are on the fabric now, feeling it. How much, she says. You have a figure from Mrs. Brennan. You hold it for a moment, weighing what you know about this woman and this dress and this moment, and then you add a shilling to the figure and you say it. She looks up at you. You let the silence sit. Done, she says. You wrap the dress. You give her a receipt from the small carbon copybook in your pocket. She places the wrapped dress carefully under her arm and moves off into the crowd. You write the amount in the day's accounts book. The number with the added shilling sits there on the page. Mrs. Brennan comes back at 3:10. She looks at the stall, at the display, at the stock remaining. She looks at the accounts book. She sees the purple dress entry. She sees the price. She says nothing for a moment. That was the dress, she says. Yes, at that price. She knew what she was buying, you say. She could afford to know. Mrs. Brennan looks at the accounts book for one more moment. Then she closes it and picks up her own position at the stall, and the conversation is over, and the afternoon continues. On the walk back, with the empty cart, the wheel making its faithful complaint, and Aggie half asleep on her feet, and the lane going quiet around you, Mrs. Brennan walks beside you. She doesn't say anything for a while. Then, I had a dress like that once, years ago, before everything. She says this quietly, to the street rather than to you, and she doesn't elaborate. You don't ask. You walk home in the thickening dark. 3 weeks pass. February moves toward March. The cold remains, but begins very slightly to lose its absoluteness. The light stays a few minutes longer each evening. The days develop edges. In those 3 weeks, you begin to understand the trade at a different level. It is not only about individual pieces of clothing, it is about flow. It is about the continuous movement of goods through a system that has no beginning and no end, only a current that runs from the point where things are made or given or discarded at one end, and passes through every layer of need and use and reuse until the material itself, the fibre itself, is finally exhausted and absorbed back into other uses. You start seeing it in the street. A man in a coat you're almost certain you've handled in the sorting room. Not the specific coat. You can't know that. But the type. The particular shade of grey and the particular weight that you know from your hands. A woman in a skirt you recognise the fabric of from a wholesale purchase. Mrs. Brennan made 2 months ago. The clothes of this neighbourhood have all passed through something like your hands, been touched and examined and valued and passed on. The city is dressed by people like Mrs. Brennan, and Mrs. Brennan is dressed by people like the collectors, and the collectors are dressed by the households, and the households are dressed by the tailors and the dressmakers, and round it goes, everything moving, nothing stopping, the current always running. You start noticing the people below the level you work at, the pure finders, the men and women who collect dog dung from the streets to sell to the tanneries for leather processing. They are not in the rag trade, but they are in the same general country of trade, the economy of waste, the world where everything that other people don't want has a value to someone. The mudlarks, children and old people mostly, picking through the mud of the Thames at low tide, finding what the river has given up. Pieces of coal, rope, the occasional metal fitting, the occasional article of clothing, the rag and bone men, the first link in the chain that ends with Mrs. Brennan. They go through the streets with their carts and their particular cry, Raga bo o o ne, He sounds so characteristic of the London street that it has become simply part of the air, buying whatever people will sell and selling it on to whoever will buy. Old metal goes to the scrap merchants. Bones go to the bone crushers who make fertilizer or glue. Rags go to the rag merchants who will process them or pass them on. And the things that fall outside of all these categories, too worn to sell to anyone, too degraded to have any identifiable use, those go to the bone men and the paper mills and the fertilizer manufacturers, and the city eats them and produces something from them, and even the nothing at the bottom of the chain is not actually nothing. This is what Mrs. Brennan meant by knowing the whole trade. It is vast, it is interconnected, and it runs on the bodies of people who are invisible unless you know where to look. You know where to look now. In the middle of the third week of February, the cholera comes to Wentworth Street. Not dramatically, not with any announcement that it is coming. It arrives the way it always arrives in London's poor neighbourhoods, incrementally through rumour and then reality, building from something people are talking about to something people are experiencing to something people are dying of. The first thing you notice is that Mrs. Walsh, the collector who works the houses north of Commercial Road, doesn't come on her usual Tuesday. When she appears on Thursday, she's thinner than she was, and there is something tight around her eyes. "My neighbour," she says to Mrs. Brennan, not to you. 3 days ago, and the family in a room below her. Mrs. Brennan asks something quietly. Mrs. Walsh nods. That evening, when Mrs. Brennan fumigates the latest collection from Mrs. Walsh, you smell the sulphur from your room upstairs. You lie in your bed, and you breathe through your mouth, and you listen to the city outside your window, and you think about the miasma theory, and about what Mrs. Brennan knows that she doesn't tell you, and about the blue coat and the river smell and the fumigation 3 weeks ago. You think about the clothes the dead wear, and the living who wear them after. The second thing you notice is that there are more items coming through the particular smell. Not the river smell, a different smell. A sour, sweetish, heavy smell that you have been learning to identify as associated with illness. And that Mrs. Brennan's handling of these items has changed. They don't go through the ordinary sorting process now. They go directly to the backyard, to the small outbuilding, and Mrs. Brennan deals with them herself. She's working longer hours. You can hear her in the sorting room after you've gone to bed, moving around, the sound of the fumigation going on into the night. You don't say anything. You help where you can. You take on more of the ordinary sorting to free her time. You handle the shop floor with increasing independence. On the third Sunday of February, you manage the entire lane stall alone, because Mrs. Brennan doesn't come at all, and you make fewer mistakes than the week before, and the takings are within 4 shillings of the usual Sunday average, and when you tell her this, she nods once in the way that means adequate. But underneath the work, there is a fear. Not the abstract fear of cholera as a fact of London life. Everyone lives with that. It is a background condition of the city, the knowledge that the water is not safe and the courts and alleys are full of risk. This is more specific. This is the fear of someone who handles clothing for a living, who understands now, more completely than she did in September, the logic of how things pass from body to body, how the invisible moves through the material world. Every piece of cloth you touch is a link in a chain. Every piece has been against skin. The question of which skins and what is happening to those skins when the cloth was next to them, this question, which 4 months ago you didn't know to ask, sits now in the back of every day's work. You warm your hands at the fire. You work. You don't let the fear make you slow or clumsy, but you feel it. On a Wednesday in the last week of February, a woman comes into the shop who changes the shape of the week. She comes in the mid-afternoon. You're on the counter. Aggie is running an errand. Mrs. Brennan is in the sorting room. You hear the door. You look up from the ledger and the woman is there. She's perhaps 40, dressed neatly but not well, in the clothes of someone making a determined effort at respectability that their finances are not entirely supporting. A grey wool coat, good cut, slightly worn at the cuffs, good boots, a bonnet that was fashionable some year ago and has been carefully maintained. She's not here to shop. You can tell this from the way she comes in, not looking at the stock, looking at you, the look of someone who has rehearsed a purpose. Good afternoon, you say. Can I help you? She puts both her gloved hands flat on the counter, steadies herself. I'm looking for a coat, she says. A man's coat. Dark blue. Good wool. It would have come in recently, within the last 2 or 3 weeks. The sorting room door is closed. You can hear Mrs. Brennan moving behind it. You keep your face in the position that Mrs. Brennan's face is always in. Flat, informative, giving nothing away. We get a great deal of stock, you say. I'd need more to go on than that. The lining is silk, cream silk. The buttons are horn, some of them. 2 were replaced with black plain ones at some point. There would be a stain at the collar. She says this last quietly. A dark stain. A pause. And it would smell, she says, like the river. Your hands under the counter find the button in your apron pocket. Everything you've learned in 5 months. When to speak, when to wait, when a question is a question, and when it's something else. Everything arrives at once. I'm sorry, you say. I don't recognize that specific item. We don't keep detailed records of every piece that comes through. This is partially true. The stock ledger exists. But you haven't heard her name yet. You don't know what she is to this coat or to the man who wore it, and you need more before you can decide what to do. I'm not here to buy it back, she says. She seems to understand that this needs saying. I just want to know. A pause. He was my husband. The sorting room door opens. Mrs. Brennan comes through. She looks at you. She looks at the woman at the counter. She takes in the scene with the accuracy she brings to everything. Mrs. Brennan, you say, this woman is asking about a coat. Mrs. Brennan steps up beside you. She looks at the woman. You're Mrs. Eleanor Cross, she says. It is not a question. The woman blinks. Yes. You better come through. She lifts the counter hatch and the woman comes through into the back of the shop. You follow, because Mrs. Brennan does not tell you not to. They sit in the small parlour, Mrs. Brennan behind her desk, Mrs. Cross on the chair across from it, her gloved hands folded in her lap with a care that suggests she's doing something important with her hands to keep them still. You stand near the door, which is the appropriate position, present but not participating, learning. Mrs. Brennan pours tea. She does this without asking. She's giving the woman time to arrange herself. Your husband, she says, Richard Cross. He worked as a clerk, shipping company in Wapping. Yes, Mrs. Cross says. Did you know him? No, I knew of the situation. She says this carefully. You watch Mrs. Cross's hands tighten on each other. Then you know he didn't. She stops. Starts again. He didn't jump. The inquest verdict was accidental. He couldn't swim. He went to the dock in the evening to collect something from the office, and there was fog and the board was loose. Her voice is very controlled. It is the voice of someone who has given herself this speech many times and is focusing on delivering it correctly. Accidental? I understand, Mrs. Brennan says. The coat was given to a man by the dock supervisor before the authorities were informed. I don't know who the man was, but someone told me, someone who knew someone, that it was likely to have come through the trade. She pauses. The lane. It did come through here, Mrs. Brennan says. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Mrs. Cross closes her eyes for a moment, then opens them. Where is it now? Gone out to the rag merchants. I'm sorry. She says this with a directness that is not unkind. Once something is in the rag chain, it doesn't come back. Mrs. Cross nods. Her hands unclench. She looks at her lap. I understand, she says. I had to ask. A long pause. You take the button out of your apron pocket. Mrs. Brennan looks at you. A sharp look. You hold the button up. There was something in the coat's pocket, you say. I kept it. I don't know why. I just did. You put it on the desk between them. Mrs. Cross looks at it. Her face does something that you won't forget. Something that is not crying and is not composure. Something in between. The face of someone containing something very large in a very small space. Containing it with effort because they have to. She reaches out and picks up the button. She holds it in both hands and she turns it over, and she looks at the sailing ship on the face of it, worn smooth at the centre where someone's thumb has been. He was at sea before the counting house, she says. 12 years. He kept this from his first uniform. She closes her fingers around it. I looked for it everywhere. She looks up at you. Thank you, she says. You don't know what to say. You say nothing. You stand by the door and you feel the weight of what just happened, and you don't look away from it. Mrs. Brennan walks Mrs. Cross to the door. She does this with a courtesy that you've never seen her direct toward anyone in any transaction before. A genuine, unperformative courtesy, the kind that requires no audience. She says something quietly at the door that you don't hear. Mrs. Cross nods. She goes. Mrs. Brennan comes back through to the parlour. She stands for a moment with her hands at her sides. Then she straightens the papers on her desk and she goes back to the sorting room. You stand in the parlour alone. Outside, Wentworth Street is doing its end of afternoon self. A cart. A voice. The bells from Christchurch marking the hour. You think about the button, about the fact that you kept it without deciding to keep it. The decision happening in some part of you below the level of decisions. You think about the man who wore it for 12 years at sea and then 12 more in a counting house in Wapping, carrying a piece of his other life in his pocket. You think about how things pass from body to body through the world, what they carry with them, what they leave behind. You go back to the sorting table. You pick up the next piece. You get on with the work. March comes. The cold holds for another 2 weeks, then begins genuinely to loosen. The days lengthen visibly. There is morning light through the sorting room windows now when the work begins at 7. A pale, thin light that is not winter's light. Something is coming out of everything. The cholera settles into its grim work in the courts and alleys of Whitechapel and Bermondsey and St. Giles. It is not indiscriminate, though it will later be called so. It takes where the water is worst, where the courts flood with sewage, where the pump handles the same water that the drains release. It takes the very young and the very old and the already weakened, taking the ones who are least able to fight it. In Wentworth Street it does not come through the door. You don't know if this is luck or Mrs. Brennan's precautions or both, and you don't ask. You keep working. In the second week of March, Mrs. Walsh brings a collection that includes 3 pieces from an address she names carefully. watching Mrs. Brennan's face as she says it. Caught off Flower and Dean Street, she says. Family moved out. I took everything they left, didn't want to leave them in the room. Flower and Dean Street is one of the worst courts in Whitechapel. Everyone in the trade knows this. It is a name that means something specific. The bottom of the bottom. The place where poverty is most concentrated and conditions are most catastrophic and the cholera is most present. Mrs. Brennan looks at the collection for a long moment. All of it to the backyard, she says. I'll deal with it tonight. Mrs. Walsh nods. She accepts her payment. She goes. That night you hear the fumigation going on in the backyard and you smell the sulphur through your window and you think about the family who left those clothes in the room in the court off Flower and Dean Street and where they went and whether they are all right. You don't know. You won't know. The city contains too many people and too many stories, and the rag trade passes through too many of them to allow for complete narratives. People come and go through the trade like they come and go through everything. Fragments, moments, a coat, a button, a collection left behind in a room. That's the thing the trade teaches you, if you let it. Not the thing about fabrics or prices, which it also teaches you. The other thing, the thing underneath. Everything that has been worn has been lived in. The coat is not just a coat. The dress is not just a dress. They hold the shape and the smell and sometimes, in a button kept in a pocket for 20 years, the story of the person who wore them. And your work is to receive all of that and value it honestly and pass it on. That's the whole of it. That's the trade. The weeks build. March deepens. The light continues to come back. Easter approaches, and the lane gets busy with the particular energy of a neighbourhood preparing for a holiday. More people with a little extra money to spend, more collections from households doing their spring clearing, more stock coming through the sorting room, more work. You work harder than you have worked in your life, and you sleep deeper than you have slept in your life, and you learn more than you expected to learn. Mrs. Brennan gives you a small raise at the end of March. She does this by putting 2 extra shillings in with your weekly pay and saying nothing about it. You don't comment on it either, because that's how it works between you. Aggie finishes mending a coat one afternoon and holds it up and looks at it with an expression you haven't seen on her before. What? You say. Good coat, she says. She puts it on the shelf. I like it when they come out right. You look at the coat. It is good. The mending is practically invisible. The seams matched. The whole thing presenting as something that hasn't been repaired but simply is. You're good at that, you say. She shrugs. I've been doing it since I was 9. Still. She gives you a brief sideways look that might be appreciation, then goes back to her work. On a Sunday in the middle of April, you're on the lane stall alone. Mrs. Brennan is there in the morning, but leaves again at noon, which has become the pattern. Her midday meeting's now a regular feature of the week, and the market is at its full spring roar. Warmer air bringing more people out than the winter Sundays ever managed. 250,000 on a busy Sunday, you feel every one of them. You work the stall. You handle transaction after transaction, the automatic rhythm of it carrying you through, the knowledge in your hands taking over when your mind needs to rest. You make fewer mistakes now, fewer, not none. At 1:30, a man stops at the stall and looks at the men's section with the particular careful look of someone shopping for themselves. He is perhaps 25, well built. His current coat is too small across the shoulders. He's grown into it, or it wasn't quite right when he bought it. His hands are big and capable looking. He picks up one coat, puts it back, picks up another. That one, you say, before he's had a chance to examine it properly. Try it on. He looks at you. Your current coat is too small in the shoulder. That one has extra room there. It's cut for a broad back. You say it without making it personal, as information. Try it. He tries it, shrugs into it. His shoulders settle. He moves his arms, turns slightly. How much, he says. You name a price. He doesn't counter. Fair, he says. He buys it. He walks away into the crowd in it, and the Sunday swallows him. You wrap his old coat, which he left on the stall, which is a transaction as old as the trade, the exchange of an outgrown thing for a better fit, in a piece of canvas and set it on the stockpile. It will come back through sorting. It will be examined and valued and priced and sold again. It will go on. Everything goes on. This is the trade. By the end of April, you've been in London for 7 months. The 7 months feel simultaneously like very little time, and like your entire previous life is behind a great distance of experience. You know the lane the way you know your own hands now. You know the seasonal changes in what's available and what sells. You know the rhythm of the week, Monday slow, Tuesday collecting, Wednesday tibs, Thursday variable, Friday errands, Saturday preparation, Sunday the market's great full rush. You know which suppliers to trust and which to hold with both hands. You know which customers will come back and which are one-transaction visitors who buy something once and are never seen again. You know the difference between the face someone makes when they want something and are going to buy it, and the face they make when they want something and are going to try to bargain below the point where the transaction is worth doing. You know how to let silence work for you. And underneath all of this, the practical, learnable knowledge, there is something harder to name that you're also acquiring. Something like a read of the world, a feel for where things are and where they're going, and what they cost the people they pass through. Mrs. Brennan teaches you this last thing without ever stating it directly. She teaches it by the way she moves through the trade, by what she does and what she refuses to do, by the fact that she fumigates the worst stock herself rather than passing the risk to you or Aggie, by the fact that she walked Mrs. Cross to the door with courtesy that no transaction required, by the fact that she came from a room in a court off Aldgate with 1 shilling and 4pence and built something from that, and is still building it, and considers that enough. One evening in late April, you're sitting in the parlour again, Mrs. Brennan's evening tea, the papers on her desk, the 30 years of ledgers on the shelves. I want to show you something, she says. She opens a drawer and takes out a box. Small, wooden, the kind of box that holds letters or small personal items. She opens it and takes out a button. Plain. Brown. Not decorative. The kind of button from the most ordinary kind of coat. This was Patrick's, she says. My husband, from the coat he died in. She holds it for a moment, then puts it back in the box. I've had it 26 years. You look at the box. You look at her. Why are you telling me this, you ask. She closes the box. Because you kept the button, she says, and you gave it back. She looks at you with her flat, accurate eyes. That's the difference. That's the thing that matters, in the trade and everywhere else. Knowing what something is worth to the person it belongs to. A pause. That's not something I can teach you. Either you know it or you don't. She puts the box back in the drawer. She closes the drawer. You know it, she says. She picks up her pen and goes back to the ledger. You sit with your tea. Outside, late April London is doing its spring evening self. The light coming off the west windows of the buildings across the street, gold and diffuse. The particular honey light of a lengthening evening that means the city is stretching itself back towards summer, toward the months when the work is hardest, and the market is biggest, and the trade runs hottest. You feel the months ahead arranged like a road, the knowledge you'll gain in them, the things that will happen that you can't yet see. You think about the old woman in the court off the lane, her 4 coats and her hands moving through seams in the dark. 70 years in the trade. Come back when you know more, you will know more. You will keep learning until the hands know what they know and the knowledge retreats below thought. Until you can run your thumb along a seam in the dark and tell you what it needs to know. That will take years. You know that. And now you know, which you didn't know in September, that years in this trade are not a cost. They are a construction. Each one adds something. Each one changes the read of your hands and the accuracy of your eye and the range of what you know about how things move through the world. It will take years. You have time, you finish your tea, you set the cup down, you go upstairs to your room, which is still cold even in April because the building holds winter longer than the street does, and you lie down and you look at the ceiling in the last of the evening light. Tomorrow is Monday. The sorting room at 7. Mrs. Walsh's collection, if she comes. New stock on the shelves for the week. The ledger. The work. All of it going on day after day. The trade running its continuous current through the city's layers. Everything that has been worn moving on to the next place it needs to be. You close your eyes. Outside, London is making its evening sounds. The cart that always goes by at this hour, the distant bells, a dog, a conversation moving past the window, 2 voices in something between argument and laughter fading down the street. The city, doing what it always does. Tomorrow it will do it again. You'll be there. You've earned your place in it, 1 week at a time, 1 piece of cloth at a time, 1 piece of knowledge at a time. That's enough for tonight. Let your thoughts slow down the way they do at the end of a long day, the way the market slows at the end of a Sunday, the noise dropping away piece by piece until what's left is just the residue, the echo, the last few voices in the distance, the sorting room, the purple dress in the window light, the button on the desk between 2 women, the old hands moving through the seams in the dark, the weight of cloth, the warmth of cloth, things that have been held, let it settle, all of it, the whole long week of it, the smells and the sounds and the cold of the stone floor through your boots, and the feel of good wool between your fingers. Let it settle. The bells are marking an hour somewhere. You're too tired to count. It doesn't matter. Tomorrow will come when it comes. For now, there's just this. The thin blanket and the straw mattress and the sounds of Wentworth Street going to sleep around you and the whole of London, 500,000 people, moving through their nights, working their trades, wearing their lives into fabric and sending the fabric on. All of them part of the same vast moving thing, and you, small in it, learning the shape of it, becoming part of it, warm enough, safe enough, here. This city will change. Everything it builds will be rebuilt. The courts and alleys will eventually be cleared. The lane will transform into something different. Something that keeps the name but loses the smell, the particular layered ancient smell of 1,000 years of trade. The cholera will be understood and then conquered. The sulphur fumigations will stop being necessary, but people will still dress each other. Cloth will still pass from the hands that make it to the hands that wear it to the hands that pass it on. There will still be someone in a room somewhere, running their thumb along a seam, learning what their hands know. That doesn't change. The human need to be covered, to be decent, to have a coat against the cold, that doesn't change. and the trade that receives what people leave behind and finds the next home for it, that doesn't change either. Let it hold you. The weight of it, the warmth of it, the long continuous current of it running through everything. Let yourself rest in that. The sorting room will be there in the morning. The work will be there. The knowledge is accumulating in your hands, whether you're awake or asleep, the way all real knowledge accumulates slowly in the body, in the part of you that works before thought. You're building something. It takes years. You have years. You have tonight. Sleep, good night,